Sup guys, this is part 2 of the Battleship testing log. If you clicked on this video without having seen the introduction from part 1, you won't know what is going on, so go give that a watch first. At the end, I asked for requests, but I guess I wasn't clear in stating that I already have a backlog of ships that I want to test. I have ships that are level 125 already, so I can't really directly compare them to my level 120 ships. Aside from that, there are also many ships that are single target focused and really have nothing to offer in campaign, for example Flandre and Brunhilde, so I won't be bothering with them. In particular, I can show a quick example with Flandre, whose significant advantage over other normal battleships is her preload. On her preload, the first volley is aimed at a weak enemy that dies to the vanguard before her shells reach. Her second volley straight up hits nothing because it's not properly aimed. And her third volley actually does hit something, but those enemies would have died to the vanguard anyway. So after doing nothing with her preload, she's pretty much just a normal ship with not much AoE. We'll see many examples later of shelling being bad when I show you the footage of today's battleships. There were also requests for Washington. I don't want to craft her augment because I don't think she'll be much better with it. Her so-called enhanced barrage only brings its light and heavy damage up to the same level as its medium, which is not very high. Additionally, the proc rate is still not guaranteed. Washington herself has no buffs nor defensive skills whatsoever, so I really don't think she'll be better than the likes of Maryland or Alabama even with her augment. If in the future I see something that leads me to believe there could be a chance that Washington is actually kinda good, I might give her a try. I'm not leaving out the possibility that I'm missing something like I did with Rodney Meta, but I just can't see it right now. The ships I'll be going over in this part are Maryland, Gascogne, Owari, Indiana, and Constellation. First up is Maryland. What sets her apart from the other big 7s is her potential to ramp up her damage significantly as her HP decreases. Unfortunately, she doesn't really have any defensive skills whatsoever to help keep her alive when she's low, nor any skills to draw aggro so that she can be the one losing her HP to access the damage buff, so it's quite unreliable. Just like other similar barrages I looked at in the first log, she struggles to get rid of both the higher priority elites in the middle and the threatening enemies up in the corner by herself. She ended up losing quite a lot of HP after just 2 fights, but it's not a terrible thing for her because she does get the damage buff out of it. By the end of the third fight, Theseus was very low on HP, mostly due to the battleship production that's always staying around in the top corner of the field. Putting an aimed torpedo bomber on Unicorn could really improve the fleet's consistency with regard to dealing with that specific enemy, so it's something to consider if you find yourself running into the same problem. This is something that you have to watch your fleet to notice, and not a blanket aimed torpedo bombers are better than Wyvern in chapter 14 kind of statement. At the end of the third fight, with her HP at about half, I feel like her damage is starting to become quite good. In the first out of ammo fight, she fails to proc her barrage at a crucial moment and the fleet ends up going down. This one is actually entirely her fault. You run the risk of this when you use her as well as any other ship with non-guaranteed barrages. It was entirely possible for her to actually proc the barrage on this run and then clear the node, but we managed to catch a clear example of how it could let you down. And here are the end screens. Even though her damage looks a lot better than Nelson retrofits, and she also gets an extra barrage when her HP gets slow, I don't think it's worth risking the 30% chance to whiff during an important moment like it did here. Next up is Gascogne. She is a very popular, cute, and consistent ship, but unfortunately her gimmick is completely nullified in this chapter and even becomes a detriment. Both of her volleys are typically aimed at high priority targets, which is what makes her unique and good in a lot of situations, but due to concealment, she'll often not be able to find the actual high priority target, or the aim will just be totally off. I will just show a bunch of examples of it happening. Additionally, her barrage doesn't go quite far enough for some of the enemies that it needs to hit, but it's not a problem exclusive to her barrage for this stage. Due to her gimmick being turned into a disadvantage, fights were occasionally dragged on well past 1 minute, which is very slow. the fleet just barely managed to get by one battle when out of ammo. Ultimately, her performance is subpar because her aiming is a complete detriment, and looking at her damage in the end screens, you can really see that her output is among the lowest of the ships that have been put through the stage so far. Next up is Owari. She has extremely high stats which puts her shelling among the top of all gold battleships. Her barrage, while aimed, actually has a fixed pattern that always covers a decently large area. Looking at the situation with the repair ship in the middle and the battleship to the side, her damage and barrage deals much better with it than most of the other battleships that we have looked at thus far. Typically, they would focus all their damage at the repair ship and deal very little to no damage to the battleship, and then Unicorn's airstrike after wouldn't be able to finish off the battleship, so it would stick around until Theseus' airstrike. On the other hand, Owari is able to deal quite a lot of damage to the battleship, and it dies to Unicorn's airstrike. The fleet is about as healthy as it ever looked after 5 fights, so I engage a 2-star battleship fleet, which is more difficult than the typical escort fleet I would engage when out of ammo, and the fleet makes it out alive. At this point though, it's not healthy enough to get through one more battle. Looking at the end screen, although she never got close to MVP, from actually watching the battle, Owari appears to be one of the top performers, both in terms of damage output and consistency. Even though her damage numbers look similar to those of Gascogne, you can clearly see the difference in their performance when you actually look at the footage, which is why I'm not taking the end screen results seriously for the most part. Next up is Indiana. She is a barrage ship, but quite frankly her barrage damage is not good. Although it flies straight, it does ignore shields, but that doesn't matter when the damage is so poor. Take a look at the enhanced version here, giving So a scratch on the back in slow motion. By the end of just the first fight, she's already at half HP. In the second fight here, you can see the regular version of it quite clearly, doing just about next to nothing. And here is yet another sequence where she struggles to take out a wave of enemies that aren't particularly strong, even with the help of Musashi's cross-fleet barrage, and then her enhanced barrage procs at some random time when there aren't really any enemies on the field. In the end screen, it definitely appears as if she's doing a lot, but I think that it's in large part due to her not finishing waves of enemies by herself. Then the carriers have to clean up the rest of the enemies she left behind with their airstrikes, which ends up decreasing their damage dealt while increasing the duration of the battles. A 159 finish against 3-star battleship nodes with ammo is definitely among the slowest clear times from the battleships that have been tested so far. For reference, Maryland consistently cleared the same node within a minute, and Nelson Retrofit finishes around the same time, so I can't see Indiana being any better than either of them. Curiously, the fleet ends the first 5 fights with a good amount of HP, so it's able to clear 2 more escort nodes out of ammo and spawn the boss, which is actually pretty good, but I'm not sure it would have been able to get through a battleship node out of ammo with her lack of damage. The spawns weren't particularly weak either, fighting 2 3-star battleship nodes and 1 2-star battleship node, but I still feel like she's a bit weak and somehow got lucky overall. Despite looking more favorable in the end screens compared to Owari, I feel like Owari is still much more impactful than her. The last ship we have for this part is Constellation. Her barrage definitely looks very impactful and seems to deal better with the situation with the repair ship in the middle and battleship off to the side than most of the other battleships. By the end of the 5 fights with ammo, the fleet looks quite healthy, so I engaged a 2-star battleship node out of ammo, and the fleet is able to make it out with the loss of Unicorn. The clear times seem to be pretty solid, and although she never actually managed to MVP once, she was very close to the ship that did end up MVPing pretty much every run, so just unlucky I guess. By the way, in the raw footage for Constellation, I actually did 2 runs of 14-4, because the first one had spawns that were a little too easy, so I ran it again to get spawns that were a bit more in line with the other battleships. Plugging the ships into the categories of amazing, great, and acceptable, Maryland is going right beside Nelson in the acceptable category. Even though her damage is quite significantly higher, it's much more likely for her to miss a barrage during a crucial moment that could result in a failed run compared to Nelson. Gascogne is also going into this category because of how her gimmick interacts with the stage mechanics. She's much better in any other chapter, but in this one in particular, I don't think she's very good at all, and doesn't feel like an upgrade over the big 7s. Owari is going into great, but I'd say she's the top of great, while Nagato meta is closer to the bottom. Ronnie meta just set too high of a bar in my opinion for amazing, but her run was a bit of a unique situation. Indiana will also find herself in acceptable. I think she's better than Gascogne, but no better than the big 7s, especially not when investment is taken into account. Finally, Constellation will go right beside Owari, but slightly behind. Again, this is purely based on observation and vibes and not data, so you may disagree with my assessment, even if we're looking at the same footage. I might record down some numbers like clear times and such at the end, but to be honest, the sample sizes are way too small for that at 1 run per ship, so it wouldn't mean a whole lot. This is costing a lot of oil though, so it's quite tedious for me to gather a huge sample size, and to be honest, I don't think most people will really care when they can just coin FTG and have a better option than everything that I'm going over in these videos. Once I go through the entire backlog, I might take the top 3 to 5 ships and take an even closer look, but for now, this is all we've got. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.